Welcome to Cheat Sheet Tales, where secrets slip, lies unravel, and the truth always has a twist. Real stories, raw confessions, shocking betrayals. Drop a comment if you've ever caught a red flag too late. Now, let's get into today's tale. Hi, my name's Eliana, and last Saturday night I watched my own sister slow dance with my husband, under a chandelier I paid for. While guests whispered like I was already dead, they thought I'd break, down, cry, beg. Instead, by sunrise, I was gone. And with me, I took every secret they never knew I kept. The kind of secrets that don't just burn bridges, they level entire foundations. Before we dive in, tell me, what time are you listening? And where from? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. Now let me tell you what really happened the night I vanished. The first thing I noticed was the silence behind the smiles. I stepped into the ballroom of the Fairmont in Austin, clutching a small silver box wrapped with a dusty blue ribbon. Inside was a bracelet I'd custom ordered for Miss. A pale aquamarine stone set in gold, her birthstone. It wasn't expensive, but it carried a quiet weight. Like me, I wore our mother's old pearl pin on the collar of my navy wrap dress. The fabric was soft and modest. I hadn't bought anything new for the event. Truthfully, I hadn't even planned on coming. But something in me, perhaps old duty, perhaps the last shred of hope, pushed me through the doors. The air was filled with champagne giggles and piano jazz. But when I walked in, conversations faltered, just for a second, then resumed, like nothing had changed. "Hey, Eliana," someone muttered, with a distracted half-smile. I nodded back, unsure if they were actually speaking to me. No one offered to take my coat. No one reached for the gift. I stood at the entrance for what felt like too long, clutching the box like a lifeline, my fingers going numb. I scanned the room for me, my sister, my only sister, my beautiful, dangerous sister. She was across the room, laughing, radiant under the chandelier. Cassian, my husband, stood beside her, his hand resting far too comfortably on the small of her back. I walked in farther, found an empty spot near the drink table, and took a sip of water. Not wine, not tonight, I told myself. I was just here to celebrate, to smile, and to leave early. No trouble. No fuss. That promise broke. 10 minutes later, the music slowed. From the stage, someone announced a special dance, just for our glowing bride-to-be, Miss. Turned, her sequined gown catching the light like ice. Cassian held out his hand to her. Bold, casual, and she took it. Like she'd been waiting. They stepped into the middle of the room under a pale spotlight. The music began. Frank Sinatra, of course. "The Way You Look Tonight," a love song. They moved like they'd done it 1,000 times. She leaned into him, her head against his chest. He whispered something, and she laughed like a schoolgirl, the kind of laugh that made people turn and smile. People began recording. "She's really close with him, huh?" someone near me said. And then I saw it. The pearl pin. Not on me, on her. My throat went dry. The pin. I had handed it to her last Christmas. Not because she asked, but because she cried and said she missed Mom. I'd wrapped it in tissue paper. Told her it was a symbol. Something to keep us connected, I said. But Miss never believed in symbols. She believed in ownership. I stood frozen. My hands clenched at my sides. My heart wasn't racing. It was folding in on itself. Cassian caught my eye. For a second I thought he'd pull away, that he'd feel some sliver of shame. But no, he smirked, like a man who knew he wouldn't be challenged. He twirled her. Laughter erupted around them. Phones caught every angle. Someone said behind me, "Isn't that her husband?" Then came the toast. Miss stood by the stage, a flute of champagne in one hand. "Thank you all for being here tonight. To my amazing family, my incredible fiancé, Cassian. You've been such a support through everything." There was clapping. "No." One turned toward me. My name was never spoken. Not once. I set the gift box on a table. I didn't drink the wine. Didn't touch the food. Didn't say goodbye. I walked out into the Texas night with nothing but the dress on my back. And a silence so loud it rang in my ears. And that's how I disappeared before the cake was even cut. That night, the world thought I'd just gone home. They didn't know I had a plan. I drove through the quiet streets of Austin with both hands steady on the wheel, though nothing else about me felt steady. My phone lit up on the passenger seat. Cassian's name flashing again and again. No voicemails, just calls. I didn't answer. I didn't even turn it face down. I let it blink, fade, then blink again, like some pathetic flare from a man who knew the ship was sinking and still tried. To act surprised, the yellow glow of the streetlights blurred into streaks as I passed. I wasn't crying. I hadn't cried all night. It wasn't numbness. It was more like preservation. As if even my tear ducts knew I had to keep everything contained until I was safe. But the images kept cycling, like a broken film reel, her fingers on his chest, his hand settling too low on her back. That smirk, and the pin, that damn pin, winking under the lights like it belonged there. By the time I turned into the cul-de-sac, the world was asleep. My porch light was off. Cassian's truck wasn't. In the driveway, inside everything looked the same, too much the same. I kicked off my shoes and dropped my clutch on the console table by the door. My heels had left faint blisters I hadn't noticed earlier. As I passed the hallway, I noticed his duffel bag was gone. It wasn't his usual overnight gym bag. This was the larger one, the one he used when we went to Arizona for our anniversary, and the drawer where he kept his spare car keys, cracked open, empty. I exhaled through my nose and set my keys down. Then I checked my phone again. This time, with purpose. One new voice memo. Not from Cassian, from Ms. I sat on the edge of the couch before hitting play. Her voice was syrupy, slurred just enough to betray the champagne. "You were never meant for him, Elle. You were just the preview." There was a giggle, muffled music, the faint clinking of glasses. "I mean, come on. You saw us tonight. It's like we finally got to stop pretending." The message ended with the sound of someone calling her name in the background. Probably Cassian. I stared at the wall across from me for a full minute. Then I forwarded the voice memo to both my work email and my backup drive. I also saved it to the cloud, under a new encrypted folder named for later. When I stood, I noticed the hum, a kind of quiet that didn't belong in a house with two people. I walked through the living room and down the hall toward the bedroom. As soon as I opened the door, I knew. Half the closet was empty. His drawers, yanked open, some still dangling crookedly, were stripped of everything: belts, socks, dress shirts, gone. I opened the bathroom vanity, his toothbrush, missing. The cologne I bought him for Christmas, gone. The expensive hair trimmer he swore was too fancy to travel with, gone too. There was no note. Not even a text. Just the kind of absence you could smell. Like something had been ripped away too fast, leaving heat and static in its place. I walked over to my desk in the corner of the room, opened my laptop, and logged into our joint bank. Account. The number glared up at me. $43,000 withdrawn. Just 6 hours earlier. All in one transaction. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I pulled out a pad of paper and started a checklist. Lock credit cards, freeze bank accounts, call attorney, separate business assets. I paused on that last one. Business. I headed out to the backyard, flipping the patio lights on as I went. The spring air was crisp. The wind stirred the jasmine vines that curled along the fence. The fire pit was still warm. That's when I saw it. Blackened corners of papers poked out between the logs. Charred, but not completely gone. I crouched down and pulled one free. My licensing agreement. Signed. Stamped. Mine. Another scrap. My original product sketches, still faintly visible through the burn. He hadn't just taken the money. He'd tried to erase my name from my own work. That man had watched me pull 16-hour days for 2 years straight. Watched me present prototypes, deal with lawyers, pitch investors. And now, without saying a single word, he'd tried to vanish it all into ash. I stood up slowly. I didn't shake. I didn't cry. I walked back inside, poured a glass of water, and sat at my desk. I clicked open a folder labeled Insurance. It asked for a passcode. I entered it. Inside were scanned copies of every contract, email threads, NDAs, recordings, timestamped photos, investor lists, a folder labeled Myas June. It's June. It didn't. The bag I hadn't unpacked sat beside the armchair. Slouched like I felt. I knelt to zip it up fully. And something caught, wedged between 2 journals. There it was. A letter. My name on the front in my grandfather's deliberate handwriting. I paused. My fingers trembled. Not from fear, but from the strange certainty that whatever it said, it would matter. I opened it slowly. Eliana, if you're reading this, then it means time did what it does. I always told you to be kind, but not blind. Love is not license. And the ones closest to you will try to dress theft as care. Document everything. Protect your name. Enclosed, a notarized copy of your co-ownership clause. I witnessed it myself. I love you. Stay sharp. Grandpa? I let the letter fall gently into my lap. The weight of his words pressed harder than grief had when we buried him. His voice echoed in my chest. Firm. Protective. And always just ahead of the storm. I folded the clause twice and slid it into my laptop sleeve. It felt like a weapon. Sheathed in cotton. Hours passed. Or maybe only minutes. The lines blurred. After that, I curled up on the worn couch, knees to chest, still in yesterday's jeans. I let the tears come. Not for them, but for me. For the woman I had silenced in the name of keeping peace. For the parts of me I handed over to people who smiled with their teeth, but spoke with knives. Maybe I thought being loved meant being useful, or quiet, or pleasing. Maybe that's what they counted on. I wiped my cheeks and sat up straighter. No more maybe. The USB stick sat in the dish beside the TV remote, like it had always belonged there. I plugged it into the laptop. The file loaded with its familiar flicker, Melis's voice again, laughing. Cassian's nodding silence. The smirk. This time, I didn't flinch. I uploaded it to 3 new folders. Encrypted, hidden behind names only I would recognize. One set was cloud-based, the second offline. The third, stored on a drive, tucked beneath the wooden floorboard under the fridge. If someone ever tried to erase me again, they'd find themselves chasing smoke. The next morning, I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I dressed in black. Simple. Sharp. I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize my own eyes. Then I drove down the coast, letting the miles stretch out the knots in my chest. By the time I stepped onto the rooftop in Oakland, the sun was beginning to tilt toward dusk. The city buzzed below like a secret everyone was in on. Cassian and Mays were seated at the long table, surrounded by people in polished shoes and designer watches. The clink of silverware, the hum of thin laughter. I didn't wait to be seen. I walked up and stood at the head of the table. It took 3 seconds for Cassian to notice me. His jaw tightened. Melis's eyebrows arched, but she didn't flinch. "Eliana," she said, the tone too smooth. "What a surprise." "I figured I'd drop by," I said, reaching for an empty glass. This looked like a celebration. Cassian half stood. "We're in the middle of a private, 2 long games," I said, raising the glass, "and short memories." Mrs. Smile twitched. I reached into my purse, pulled out a napkin, and placed it in front of Cassian. Folded neatly on it, a printed image of the forged signature from the transfer form. It was off by just 1 letter, an L swapped for a capital I, something a stranger wouldn't catch, something a sister should have known better than to fake. "Tell Milius next time she signs my name," I said. "She should spell it right." The table went silent. Someone dropped a fork. I didn't wait for the replies. I turned and walked away, my heels steady on the concrete. No shouting, no slaps, no courtroom drama, just a napkin, a quiet line, and a truth too sharp to ignore. The elevator doors opened as I approached, and I didn't even look back. But I knew they were watching. I could feel the heat of it between my shoulder blades, and I knew what would come next. So did they. But what they didn't know, the next move, was theirs. But I had already made mine. Days ago. By the time the boardroom filled with murmurs and the scent of polished wood polish in San Francisco's financial district, I had already been awake for hours. I didn't fly in. I didn't need to. A well-timed, virtual entrance would say more than any pair of heels ever could. They'd chosen to meet without me, as if I'd already been written out. But I knew Cassian. I knew how he operated. Bluff, posture, charm, then pressure. I waited until he stood at the front of the conference table, gesturing to slides that painted himself as the strategic genius behind Hemlock Bowworks, my company. My code. My late nights and sacrificed weekends. Then I clicked join meeting. The screen behind him flickered once. Then I appeared. Cassian froze, his hand midair. "Good morning," I said evenly. "I believe I'm still listed as a co-founder. Majority? Vote holder if we're splitting hairs." Dead silence. Then a cough. I uploaded the notarized clause directly into the call's shared drive. Dated 3 years ago. Witnessed by Judge Horace Hemlock. That would be my grandfather. For those unfamiliar, one of the older board members, Harriet Lyle, leaned forward and squinted at her tablet. Her brows drew together. Why weren't we told about this clause? Cassian opened his mouth. Nothing came out. His neck flushed red. I didn't raise my voice. Because no one asked who built the company. You only asked who signed the checks. Marlene's lips pressed together. Then she nodded. And just like that, my seat at the table was no longer up for debate. After the call ended, I opened a secure browser and filed the motion. The joint marital business account. Cassian and I had set it up when we merged assets for Hemlock. He always said, "Transparency builds trust." Turns out, he meant my transparency, not his. My motion cited forgery, unauthorized signature usage, and breach of fiduciary trust. I attached the relevant files, logs, and a flagged timestamp showing digital tampering from Mrs. Device. The bank's compliance team acted swiftly. 3 hours later, I got the confirmation. Account status, frozen, a minute after that. Miss tried to move $50,000 from the media allocation line item. Her screen blinked. Access denied. Legal hold authority, E. Hemlock. I imagined the look on her face, the clenched jaw, the manicured finger tapping her phone screen in disbelief. Somewhere in a penthouse suite with floral arrangements and iced matcha. She was finally learning what it felt like to lose. Cassian texted at 11:47 a.m. "You've made your point. Back down before this gets ugly." I stared at the screen, then typed, "You're mistaken." That wasn't my point. That was just the introduction. No emoji. No signature. Just facts. I scrolled to the contact saved under Grandpa's name. Not him, of course. He was gone. But his longtime clerk, Vincent Calloway, had become a federal ethics auditor. He'd always said, "Corruption leaves fingerprints. You just have to know where to dust." I called. He picked up on the second ring. "Eliana, I need help reviewing some asset movements," I said. "And I have a list of board votes that, well, they feel more like patterns than strategy." His tone changed. "I'm listening." We set a time. Later that day, I took a slow drive north. The coastal traffic gave way to winding turns and sun-dappled silence beneath the redwoods. I rolled, the window down. Let the breeze comb through my hair. A voicemail I hadn't played in years surfaced from my saved archive. It was Grandpa. His voice crackled with that calm certainty that never faltered, not even in his final months. "You are not hard to love, sweetheart. You are hard to fool. And that's a blessing in the right hands." I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until that moment. My hands tightened on the wheel, and for the first time in years, I smiled, without pain trailing behind it. They had tried to erase me from every decision, but the woman they erased had just become the shadow behind every consequence. It had been a week since I turned the tide in that boardroom, and in truth I hadn't. Slept the same since, not because I was restless, but because for the first time, I no longer flinched in anticipation of the next betrayal. I anticipated it. I studied it. I dismantled it before it arrived. So when the invitation to the Hemlock Family Foundation Gala never came, I wasn't surprised. I had already seen the guest list. My name was nowhere on it, but I showed up anyway. The ballroom at the Fairmont gleamed with soft chandeliers and carefully arranged floral displays. Deep red roses and white orchids, the kind Mace liked to pair to symbolize legacy and vision. She once said those words to a journalist, like she'd coined them. Tonight was meant to celebrate our family's contributions to science, education, and literacy programs across California, the ones I spent 5 years building, in classrooms, living rooms, sometimes literal barns in underserved communities. I stood in the back, dressed in black, quiet, unnoticed, until the video montage began. There were no grand confessions, no pleas for forgiveness, just a truth whispered too late. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into the journal I kept with me now. It wasn't closure. Not exactly. But it was the closest my mother and I would ever come. A month had passed since the court ruling, since Cassian's smirk had finally disappeared for good. He left the country the next day, citing professional opportunities abroad. In reality, he was dodging subpoenas. Mace had gone quiet too. Her foundation site blinked offline, with a curt statement, pausing operations for personal reflection. Translation: the donors pulled out. The scandal grew teeth, and no one wanted to be seen holding hands with a fraud, but I didn't follow them anymore. I had other things to build. The counseling center we launched 2 weeks ago bore my grandfather's name, the Hemlock House for Quiet Recovery. It sat in an old, converted coastal building, surrounded by native gardens and shaded by tall eucalyptus. We didn't take photos. We didn't post stories online. People came when they were ready. We were there when they arrived. I used a portion of the reclaimed estate to fund its first 2 years. No fanfare. No headlines. Just a single logo above the entrance, a rosewood pin, carved into the shape of a flame. Steady. Not fierce. Some of the women who came through the doors recognized the symbol. Most didn't. That was okay. It wasn't about legacy anymore. It was about rebuilding. Today. My son sat next to me on the beach. He was drawing something in the sand with a twig, while I let the sea wind tangle my hair. He glanced up and said, "This stick reminded me of your pin." I looked at the piece of rosewood he'd found near the drift line. Small, imperfect, bent slightly in the middle, like it had survived something but still chose to keep growing. I smiled. "It does look like it. It reminds me. We can grow, again, from where we were broken." He laid the twig next to my shoe, careful, like it was something sacred. A seagull called overhead. A couple wandered by with their dog. Somewhere behind us, wind chimes from a beachfront cafe played something faint and out of tune. I didn't need music anymore, or crowds. What I had now was quiet. Not the kind that leaves you lonely, but the kind you earn. The kind that comes when the fight is over, and you're finally able to sit in your own life, uninvited by anyone, unwanted by none, because you built this part, every inch of it. I ran my fingers along the edge of the journal in my lap. The rosewood pin sat inside the front cover now, its weight grounding, not burdensome. Sometimes when the music fades and the crowd vanishes, what's left is what was always yours, what was